This is Mondo Loops. With almost 2 million monthly listeners, he has become a household name in the lo-fi chill hop space. And alongside his expanding discography, he also creates tutorials on his channel that makes him a bit of a trendsetter for the future sounds of the genre too. And in today's episode, we're not only going to build a track with Mondo Loops in mind, he's going to help us make it. Mondo Loops, thank you so much for being on the channel today.
Yeah, great to be here, man. Thank you very much for having me. I'm a huge fan of your channel. I love all the variety of music that you cover, and you've got such an inspirational and informative style of videos. So yeah, it's really exciting to be here.
Dude, you're too kind. And to continue that kindness, you've sent us some stems to work with today. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I've recorded some sort of arpeggiated notes on my guitar, and then using my new Strat, I've layered in a little bit of a solo, which you can spice up and use however you like. Yeah, I'm interested to see what you do with it.
All right, so for you guys at home, this is what Mondo sent over. And let's just get started with the guitar.
It's, I guess, quite a typical way I would start a track, which is guitar using a sort of 1-5-3 voicing rather than on guitar playing bar chords. I like to play the individual notes, the 1-3-5 of a chord triad, and then from there I can start with a really basic chord progression, and then I can layer in some higher octaves of the chord progression, layer in some like sevenths and ninths to make the chords more interesting, and then generally just solo over the top of it, which is exactly what I've done here.
I haven't done too much with the guitar right now. I took out some harmonics that I didn't like in the second track, which were just standing out a little bit bright. Other than that, I've added an auto filter to these two guitar groups here. If I expand on this, you can see that just in the intro to our loop, I've filtered that in so it comes from a low pass place to a more brighter extension of that guitar, and then dips back down when we get to the guitar solo. So there'll be more focus on that particular track later on. I think it's safe to say that you're amongst some of the top lo-fi creators, and your sound has a very distinctive sleepy tone, if I may say. Do you agree with that? And if it is a conscious choice, is it something that you strive for every time you sit down to create a track?
Thanks, man. Very kind of you to say. Yeah, I think the sleepy tone is probably a fair sort of summary of a lot of the music that I release under Mondo Loops. I'm quite conscious that the sleepy sort of beats, or maybe even lo-fi beats in general, have got a bit of a bad rep for being a little too repetitive or a little too minimal. So that's definitely something I'm trying to consciously avoid. But the sort of emotive and almost cinematic style of the sleepy beats, I guess, is what I'm really trying to focus in on. So the track's more of, I guess, a journey. So I love doing stuff like making piano pieces that are very arpeggiated and they flow into different sections. Same with guitar, I love layering different guitars, stacking them together and sort of trying to make these evolving pieces that sort of blend into each other. So yeah, I guess my approach then when I'm sitting down is to try and make emotive, cinematic and organic. I guess I love to have the Foley rich sound and texture in there as well.
So with the melodic accompaniment, it was important that I came up with something not only in the style of Mondo Loops, but something that the listener could whistle along to and would act like an earworm. So we've got this. I wanted to couple that with something that was a little bit more in keeping with his sound, which would be the grand piano. And today I was actually really vibing with just the scalar 2 sound. So what I've done to help blend these sounds amongst the track is to actually filter in those first few notes from that serum patch that I have, which is just a basic pluck kalimba pattern, by the way. And over time, that's going to become louder and more present than the piano. And at other times, that's going to dip below the piano. Now before we move on, let's talk about processing as well for this group. I've EQ'd that group, added quite a harsh compressor. Look at the ratio on this, 12:6, with the attack and the release all the way down. It's going to make that instrument stand out a lot more than it was before. And then I've added the glue compressor with a slow attack and a quick release, and it's just going to help smooth out the dynamics of that instrument. And then finally, fresh air from solid state, so I can bring out a little bit more of that air, that brightness. Now from here, it was really easy just to add a basic sub sine. Might not be able to hear that if you don't have headphones on. Just using the basic sub sine preset from Ableton here, and I've just changed the release time and the sustain a little bit, so we're just working on the decay rate of that instrument. That's going to sit really nicely with our guitars above. I don't want to overplay that bass, so we're just playing long legato notes throughout. Felt like it was important to add a little bit of myself in here. So I've also added another Serum preset, which is kind of like a mock woodwind instrument. Mondo, one of the questions that I get asked the most is how I go about starting my tracks. And even though I underline that there's no right or wrong way to do this, I think people find it interesting to dive into the arrangement techniques of their favorite musicians. So with that, are there any go-to instruments that you gravitate towards at the start of a project, or any templates that you regularly use that can help inspire some of the viewers of this channel?
Really good question, and definitely agree with you on this, that there is no sort of correct answer, I guess, but it is interesting to hear different takes on this. I've been making lo-fi for maybe 3-4 years or something like that. And in that time, I've had the chance to work with a lot of really incredible producers. I know a lot of people who would potentially start with drums and then build a track around that, or could start with more melodic stuff. So it's interesting to see how other people work in that sense. But for me personally, I usually always start with the sort of more melodic elements, guitar or piano for 90% of the cases. And it's probably worth mentioning that I don't always, I guess, stick to the same structure, but as a sort of working musician, I need to have my workflows. I need to be as efficient as I can be, I guess, to keep up with the demands of being a producer. But I do like to sometimes sort of scrap everything that I have and try and start something organically without really thinking about where I'm going to end up, just maybe messing about with sound and sound design and stuff, and that can come up with some really interesting tracks. I don't think I necessarily use templates. Maybe I should. I've got a lot of presets, so in the same sense that maybe you could have a template that you would open up and it would have your favorite guitar, drums, etc. I've got drum racks, which I like to change sort of periodically. So for example, I've just finished an album. When I was writing that album, I used a sort of the same drum rack from my last sample pack, and that sort of, I guess, gave it a bit of unity. And then after that's just finished, now I'm going to try and refresh it just to make sure that I'm using different sounds and sort of evolving my sound. But yeah, so presets, drum racks there, I've got my ambiances, I've got my guitar racks, my favorite sort of instruments, virtual instruments are all sort of ready to drag and drop in. So yeah, it's similar to templates, I guess, but without actually having the open up template.
All right, so it looks like we kind of gravitated towards that similar first instrument with the piano there. Following this, I dove into just creating the drums, and I did want to do this in keeping with Mondo Loop's drum sound. I wanted to make a couple of changes though. So if you've seen Mondo Loop's channel, it's no secret that he makes use of some of the tender spring kicks from Splice. Tender spring playing a major role in one of our earliest beat battles, which by the way, we have another one going on at the time of recording this video. This kick has a very almost acoustic tone to it. It's very full sounding. I like this. It's got a very lo-fi tone, but it wasn't quite as punchy as I would like it to be in this particular mix. So what I did was take the Mali raw kick, which is kind of like a house kick. And what I did was just trim the transient off of that Mali raw kick and blend it with the tail end of the tender spring kick drum. You get a tone that's a little bit cutting at the beginning, but has a lot of intimacy on that tail end. Then I've got just this nice little rim shot that I used in my previous video. Remember, this rim shot had a lot of tail. We just wanted to strip that tail end off, warp the beats, and preserve the transients and take that envelope back to 5. Leaves it with a very small click sound. And the hats we're going to keep super simple as well, because we're going to add some percussion soon. So here's our hi-hats, and we've got that classic kind of Dilla swing groove, very simple. Let's put those together. And then something I like to do is just put a click or a clap on every other snare with a lot of reverb. Following this, I wanted to replicate some of the Foley and some of the drum sound from Mondo Loop's newest album. So the first thing that I did was just grab a little percussion loop from Splice. I've added a line delay so it's much wider and the EQ8 here. So this has just got like 3 consecutive notes. Very quiet in the mix and just acts as a little fill into our main snare drum beat. Mondo Loops let us know that for this project he started using addictive drums. I wanted to add some live drums, but let's show you a different kind of method and let's use some splice loops. So what I did was just take this really long drum pattern here and then I just pitched it up 1 semitone. EQ'd out the kick drum, added a basic peak compressor, which is just a stock preset utility to just reduce the width a little bit. I'm gonna add in the Valhalla vintage verb with a tiny little bit of mix and a tiny little bit of decay, and then the auto filter, and this is the sound that we get. And then I just chop it up and keep it really, really low in the mix. I wanted to add some brushes on top of this. So just a nice loop from Splice there that I've warped and made sure fits with my snare and my hi-hat markers. The brushes have some processing on, of course, quite a harsh EQ8 pattern there. The glue compressor, just making sure that it's again a dynamic level, pretty mid-range on the attack, release and ratio there. Just bring that threshold down to -34 so it fully takes effect. Also filter frequency being automated pretty much throughout the song towards the latter part of 2 bars. And this just adds for a little bit of depth and movement within the percussion. And then finally, we have this really dry snare sound. Okay, so we all have access to your YouTube channel where you regularly break down some of your most recent work. But are there any new instruments or VSTs that haven't made their debut on the channel that we can listen out for in the future?
I'm a little bit of an addict when it comes to getting new VSTs, and I can be pretty easily swayed by a good sort of demo, and often I end up not really using these plugins that much. However, I recently picked up a set of plugins from a company called Slate & Ash. I think they're Bristol based, and they make sort of cinematic sound design tools, which I've not really had a chance to dive into yet. It's sort of been on my wish list for a few years, and I just barely scratched the surface of what you can do. I need to start dragging my own loops into there, but there's 3 different plugins essentially. One is more like cinematic pads and stuff, and you can drag your own sounds and create pads like that. One is more drum based, different engines to manipulate sounds, and I think there is one more which I couldn't even tell you what it does, but all I know is that they sounded great in the demos. They've got some really interesting pad sounds and textures, so I need to dive into that. So hopefully that will be a new one.
All right, Slate & Ash, I'm going to keep an eye on that. Something else that I've noticed in your more recent work, which I think has been inspiring other lo-fi creators, because I've heard it in a lot of playlisted beats, is the use of vocal pads. And I know that you like Distant Voices, which is a preset or a sample pack that comes from Arcade. Now, if you listen to Mondo Loop's work, you'll often hear these kind of stretched out vocal pads that just sit under the main melodies and just flesh out the music a little bit more. I wanted to add a twist to that today and have the vocals be a little bit more present and a little less like a pad, but hopefully still in the style of Mondo Loops. And what you can hear in the background is also coupled with a Labs choir, which I'll play in a second. And I've made sure that these are just nice legato notes. They're going down in velocity there as I start to build up the layers of the Arcade sample. So this is just the Labs choir, which is free, I think, and there's no processing on this one. And like I said, that just couples with what you heard just now. I've got a bunch of effects on these vocals right now, and they're also being sent to a return with even more effects. If I turn all of those off, this is what you get. So kind of dull, Definitely very quiet without the reverb, etc. It was the Valhalla vintage verb straight away, then fresh air to just bring out a little bit of brightness. It's not going crazy there with the settings. Glue compressor is again just setting that average level and dynamic of the vocals, a little bit over compressed there. EQ8 to roll off any extreme lows, and another EQ8 just to add a little bit of filter in there. I could have done it inside this EQ8, feeling a little bit lazy. The utility just to do some gain automation, and then the auto filter, similar to the brushes, we're just making sure that it ebbs and flows throughout my arrangement. And then we're sending that vocal group to the second return, which has an EQ8 on it to roll off any muddy stuff. We've got a delay, another Valhalla vintage verb. The EQ8 just automating the gain of the middle frequencies. At some points I had some like whistle notes and almost like feedbacking coming through, and then the sidechain compressor to the actual vocal group, so when the vocals are playing on their own, you're not just getting this blur of reverb. A line delay is going to make it nice and wide, and just some gradual gain automation at the very end of that return. This is such a lovely instrument that plays nicely with the guitars. Now, before we get on to finishing, arranging and processing this piece, Mondo gave me this Market Atmos. He often uses Foley sounds and field recordings. So we've started off with the Market Atmos, which I've actually boosted because I want it to play a lead role in the introduction. So you can hear some vinyl crackle there with obviously this field recording of the Market. And I've taken that down later in the project so it sits quite low in the mix. To finish things off, I've just got some white noise, which I've reversed at the end there. So we have a sweep in and a sweep out. Nice and easy. Now, of course, one of the things to remember is the arrangement. If Mondo Loops and I were going to turn this into a full song to be released, which, by the way, you want to hear that, let us know in the comments, then I would give this song a little bit more time to breathe. You'll notice that this part of the song, everything comes in together. This isn't always ideal because sometimes the listener needs a little bit of time to recognize all of those individual melodies. So I think what would be nice is to maybe start with just some of the vocal pads and get rid of that lead melody for now. Here you can just let the guitar do its thing. In the second time round, you can actually introduce that new melody. And then as you go into an outro, it's nice to have a different version of that melody. And this is being filtered out along with that guitar at the top that we mentioned at the beginning to give space to the guitar solo. Mondo Loops, thank you so much, buddy. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, man. It's been great talking to you. I'd love to work with you more in the future as well. Great stuff on the channel, so really excited to see what you come up with next. Catch you soon.
All the best to you, my friend. And if you guys want to check out Mondo Loops' channel, of course, it's linked in the description below. I'm sure this isn't the last of our collaborations. This was an awful lot of fun today. So thank you so much for being a part of it. Do let me know who you'd like to see on the channel in the future, whether that be in guest form or just classic inspired by. Do remember that if you want to release your music, you should use DistroKid. I've just released some new music in a kind of Mondo Loop style with my friend Secret Spot, and it was super easy to get it on over 200 platforms. And we just used the DistroKid splits function to make sure that we both get 50% of the revenue. If you want to use DistroKid and get 7% off your first year, then just make sure you hit the link in the description below. Guys, thank you so much once again. If you're new here or you haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.